Now I'm going to discuss how we would look for a new law. In general, we look for a new law by the following process. First, we guess it. Then we well, don't laugh, that's really true. Then we compute the consequences of the guess to see what, if this is right, if this law that we guessed is right, we see what it would imply, and then we compare those computation results to nature, or we say compare to experiment or experience, compare it directly with observation to see if it works. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. In that simple statement is the key to science. It doesn't make a difference how beautiful your guess is, it doesn't make a difference how smart you are, who made the guess, or what his name is. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's all there is to it.
Welcome to the Climate Realist channel. In this video I will present another documentary which predicted that all life on Earth will end if we do not stop the CO2 rise. This is par on course for alarmist predictions. However, this documentary, made in 2008, predicted that this would occur in the then distant future of 2015. I have edited the start and the end of the documentary together, and that section will be the first part of this video. Observe the absolute hysteria and incorrect predictions made by these experts, which is then followed by the suggested solutions to the non-existent problem.
Welcome to the Global Archive, a vast storage structure located 800 kilometers north of Norway. It contains the artwork from every national museum. There are pickled animals stacked up 2 by 2. Every film, every book, every scientific report, all stored on banks of servers. But the conditions we are experiencing now were actually caused by our behavior in the period leading up to 2015. In other words, we could have saved ourselves. We could have saved ourselves, but we didn't. It's amazing. What state of mind were we in to face extinction and simply shrug it off?
And it is global warming. For the first time, scientists confirm the link between climate change and our awful weather.
Emergency services scramble to Bedford's swollen. As the floodwaters finally worked their way along the Great Ouse, other parts of Bedfordshire didn't escape either.
We've lived up here for over 40 years, and we've never, ever had anything like this.
80,000 fatalities in Burma today after Cyclone Nergis.
Drought emergency across Western Europe, with drinking water strictly rationed in Holland, France.
Forest fires which are still sweeping across Spain.
£30 billion, a price worth paying for motorists' right to drive.
Drinking water crisis as US President Chelsea Clinton refuses Africa's demand.
Sales of air conditioning units in India.
As San Francisco's extraordinary heat wave continues into Los Angeles.
Now we're seeing extreme weather events somewhere on the planet every single day. Estimated 35 million Chinese refugees.
Skiing in the Alps is over.
The new Channel 4 documentary asks, is global warming really happening or a natural?
It's 61 degrees centigrade, the highest land temperature.
More than 100 million people are homeless tonight as
massive methane emissions from Siberia.
The last Indonesian tree fell, but biofuel prices are...
The European Union today permanently closed all of its borders.
Roadside verges must be reserved for food production.
London is underwater again as last night's 30-foot storm surge overcame the Thames Valley.
New Zealand has also now closed its borders, leaving 22 million Australians.
Reports coming in on the North Sea is boiling.
100 million
refugees from Middle East and continental Europe are all heading
Most species are now extinct, scientists estimate, and ecosystems are collapsing across the planet.
Past 2 degrees. We cannot now stop runaway climate change.
There are simply too many people to feed in Ireland's remaining farmland.
Suicide rates increasing 800%. The Amazon rainforest is still burning.
and anyone who cannot bear to eat their own cats and dogs.
Entering the 8th world food crisis.
World temperatures today passing 4 degrees.
Not retaliatory nuclear strike on today.
Across the entire continent.
We wouldn't be the first life form to wipe itself out. But what would be unique about us is that we did it knowingly. I mean, what does that say about us? The question I've been asking is, why didn't we save ourselves when we had the chance? Is the answer because, on some level, we weren't sure if we were worth saving? Throughout our history, the deal was we left the world in a better place than we found it. That was progress. The wheel, the rule of law, penicillin. It was our covenant to our children and grandchildren. My children weren't angry with me for breaking the covenant. They were too busy trying to stay alive to waste energy on blame, trying to negotiate their way through food riots and refugee camps and the collapse of society. But I think my grandchildren would have been angry had they survived into adulthood. We had an unspoken collective pact to pretend climate change wasn't happening, as though as long as we ignored it hard enough, it wouldn't be true. Not absolutely everyone. A few were shouting, "Fire!"
Hello, come on in. One of the greatest difficulties with climate change is that the effects of our emissions today are not actually realised in terms of the temperature for 30 to 40 years, so there's this time lag in the system. Which makes it difficult for us humans to respond, because we're evolutionarily equipped to deal with very immediate threats like advancing armies or dangerous animals. We're not so well equipped with dealing rationally with very long-term problems like climate change. So we have to act now to stop something happening in the future. If we wait until the full temperature effects are already upon us, then it's far too late to stop. If you remember one single number above all else, make it 2 degrees. Now everyone in the world pretty much, the European Union, big multinational corporations, Greenpeace, political parties, all agree that we have to stabilise global temperatures within 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And the reason for that is because if you cross that threshold, then there are tipping points in the Earth system which could drive the warming process essentially out of control. Huge amounts of carbon could be coming out of the world's trees and the soils, methane could be coming out of the permafrost in Siberia, and it's that extra input of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere which then leads us up the worst case scenarios to 6 or more degrees and the eventual wipeout of most of life on Earth. So our emissions have been going up between, let's say, 1950 and now. They need to level out, stabilise, and then decline just as rapidly to sustainable levels, about an 80% cut by 2050. But crucially, to keep the temperature rise within 2 degrees, this point of stabilisation needs to be at around 2015. And so that means really the timeline we've got, ticking clock, is that we have to stabilise global emissions within just 7 years from now, as we speak, 2008. And the scale of this task to achieve a transformation to a low-carbon economy for the entirety of human civilization is obviously, it's a huge monumental task, probably the greatest that humanity's ever faced.
Search visible impacts of climate change leading up to 2010.
101 degrees Fahrenheit. It's the hottest day ever recorded.
700 people are now feared dead after the strongest ever recorded day's rainfall in India's history.
Now it's official, the past year has been the driest in Melbourne's history.
The desert is advancing
at the phenomenal rate of 3 miles every year.
Dozens of Antarctic ice shelves collapsing faster than anyone predicted.
18 countries are underwater and 1.5 million people are affected.
Extraordinary to think that these are the Alps in December.
Here in Chamonix, as across the Alps, there is a dramatic lack of snow and exceptionally warm temperatures. It is a glimpse into the future.
More than half the ski resorts in Europe could shut down in the next 50 years because of global warming.
So we won't be able to go skiing. Big deal. But the thing is, it's not that, is it? That's the whole point. The fact that you can't go skiing anymore, or, you know, that the glaciers are melting, is not really the point. The point is that that's a signal that basically the Earth is destabilising, and all the norms that have allowed life to exist as it has done are changing.
Maintenant, avec le réchauffement, c'est différent. J'ai l'impression maintenant qu'on n'a plus que 2 saisons. L'hiver rejoint l'été sans qu'on s'en aperçoive, quoi. Qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? Ouais. Je ne sais pas. Je ne sais pas. Les glaciers reculent toujours.
Strange, watching these film fragments. It's like looking through binoculars, observing people on a far-off beach, running around in circles, fixated on the small area of sand under their feet as a tsunami races towards the shore.
I think one's got to be very careful about attaching a particular event to global warming. But nevertheless, the intensity of hurricanes is related to surface sea temperature. So increased intensity of hurricanes is associated with global warming.
In my opinion, our use or misuse of resources the last 100 years or so, I'd probably rename that age something like the age of ignorance, the age of stupid.
والله مستقبلي يكون يصير بالعراق هيك مع أصحابي بعزمهم بعزم أهلي كلياتهم بيجوا يعني فرح بصير فرح فيش منه بالعراق كله بالعالم كله.
Je pense que toutes les personnes à l'avenir, ils nous feront aussi peut-être le reproche de ne pas avoir pensé à préserver toute cette nature. On a su en profiter, mais on n'a pas su préserver.
I just find it surprising that after so much effort, the final act of our existence should be suicide. So why did I build this archive? It's a cautionary tale. Not for us. Too late for us. But for, well, for whoever, whatever, eventually finds this recording. And away you go.
That was the prediction of the apocalypse, which has now passed. The next section is about the solutions to prevent this Armageddon of 2015.
It is our fault. After years of debate, some of the world's top scientists have concluded...
Unequivocal is the word they use. Human activity is
contributing to changes in our Earth's climate, and that issue is no longer up to debate.
In Andermatt, they've covered a glacier with a special protective sheet to reduce its summer melt.
One way I do my bit for the environment is turning to 30 with Ariel.
This is offsetting all those flights that I take, that I have to for my job.
David Cameron even wears recycled shoes made from old fireman's trousers.
Despite all the efforts to control pollution and its effects on our climate, the level of greenhouse gas emissions has reached a record high and shows no signs of being reversed.
Despite the Kyoto Treaty and all the talk of reducing emissions of carbon dioxide, levels of this key greenhouse gas are rising faster than ever.
Oil was formed when ancient plant life in the oceans absorbed energy from the ancient sun. As these plants died, they settled on the ocean floor, along with the dead bodies of tons and tons of ocean creatures. Over the millennia, temperatures increased, and the organic matter was gradually cooked until the sun's energy was stored inside oil. 150 million years later, Shell's geologists analyze where the oil might be, then drill 3 miles down into the seabed to collect samples.
Here you go, Al. Here's your stuff.
Thank you, brother.
We get the samples and analyze them for the fossil contents. the microscopic fossils. And it's just another geoscientific tool in order to improve your possibility of finding oil. In my opinion, probably arrogantly so, but it's pretty high calling actually to try to do that, to try to figure out or maybe take apart time itself. Go back a few thousand years, and the energy available to grow our crops or feed animals was limited by the daily sunlight falling on the earth. But now we use the energy equivalent to hundreds of years of sunlight every single year. Every part of modern life is now literally made of oil, from CDs and plastic bags to medicine and computers, from clothes and carpets to cosmetics and cell phones. It's truly a wonderful and necessary substance. Then there's our food. Each calorie we eat uses nearly 100 oil calories to produce, package, refrigerate, transport. And fossil fuel-produced fertilizers now feed a couple billion or so people who could not otherwise be sustained. It would be prudent for humanity to carefully use the remaining oil to build a new society run without it. Instead, we're burning up tens of millions of barrels every day. So it will be gone. It will run out, leaving pretty much none for future generations. Even though we in the oil industry are working our asses off looking for and finding this magical substance.
Yeah, Rick. All right, push it back.
And then you see it, and you smell it, and it's greasy and ugly and smells so much like money. It's just beautiful,
£13 billion in 2005.
Lots of ideas have tried to take over the world, but there's only one winner. 3,000 adverts bombard us every day, telling us we'll be happier, more attractive and with better skin if only we buy their products. Together, they create within us an insatiable desire to buy more and more stuff. Capitalism's only goal is ever-expanding growth, but ever-expanding growth on just the one not-expanding planet is impossible. The current economic system is disastrous, not just for the planet, but for most people too. 400 years of capitalism has allowed the richest 1% to take 40% for themselves, leaving just 1% for the poorest half. But anyone wanting to live differently is thwarted at every turn. With profit the only measuring stick, destroying the planet is written into the system, and runaway climate change is a not very surprising result.
Climate scientists can estimate how much of the remaining fossil fuels we can safely burn. This amount is called the global cap. Under this proposal, the world's governments would make a binding international agreement detailing how to distribute the global cap. The earlier the start date, the greater the chance of not triggering runaway climate change. The total global emissions for the first year, say 2012, will be set at their current level. Every year following they'd shrink until, by about 2065, they're almost zero.
I have to pause at this crucial moment. This image and what they're about to say is a blatant lie. Not only is it a lie, it is the opposite to reality. The order is exactly flipped to what is being shown here. China is the #1 emitter of CO2, not the US. Here are the actual CO2 emission statistics. As you can see, Europe and the US have been stable in emissions for decades, including when this piece of propaganda was created. Not only that, but the rise in emissions is exclusive to specifically non-Western nations since the 70s to 80s. India, Africa, South America have all surged in emissions, while the West has stayed the same. If you're a climate alarmist, you should be especially annoyed, since you believe that the world will end soon and you've been sold the very opposite of a solution. Ironically, your efforts have almost certainly made the alleged problem much worse, since none of you focus on developing nations, which is exclusively where the problem is.
Initially, each country would be allocated an emissions quota according to how much they currently consume. But this would change over time. America would slash its emissions 90% from its current over-consuming position. Europe too would decrease massively, as would China. But India and Africa would increase until, by about 2025, each human being on the planet would have equal rights to the Earth's resources. Equity is the only option morally, and also practically, as developing countries won't sign up to anything less. The total emissions would then keep decreasing every year, until by 2065 we'll have weaned ourselves off fossil fuels and prevented the worst impacts of climate change. As to how each country divvies up its share to its citizens, there are various options on the table, the most promising of which is individual carbon rationing.
I think this next section is meant to be amusing, but I cannot help but be incredibly unamused by the idea of the government taking full control of all that I can and cannot consume. You as the viewers should be fully alert on the fact that this is the end goal of the climate hysteria, and this is why almost all governments of the world salivate about its implementation, despite their always alleged hesitance. I would also like to remind you the entire premise itself is based on the lie that the West consumes more, or even increasingly over time in relation to CO2. So the government will get full control over your finances, and nothing will even be solved.
Mr. W.S. Morrison is here to explain.
If, in the course of the war, we are short for a time of this or that article of food, rationing will give everyone, rich and poor alike, an equal share of all that's going.
Under this scheme, everyone in the UK would be allocated an annual carbon allowance.
Stored electronically, rather like a supermarket loyalty card, points would be deducted every time we buy or use non-renewable energy. For example, using electricity to power appliances in the home.
Or travelling somewhere by plane.
Or even buying petrol for your car.
The best way you can help is by rationing yourselves. I'm sure that all of you will buy your fair share and no more.
Of course, worried about global warming. I mean, that's got to be something that we're all concerned about. I mean, we're all doing our bit to try and conserve and looking at renewable energy, of course, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're part of the yes.
Governments will only go as far as the population demands, and that means mass protest on an unprecedented scale. Direct action like this is essential if you're going to turn an issue round in a short period of time. We've found that many, many times in the past, from the suffragettes onwards. The very fact that the crisis is taking place within our generation, it's happening right now, means that we are tremendously powerful people. So this position of despair and I can't do anything and there's no point is completely illogical. It's exactly the opposite.
Remember the English family who went to see the glacier? They're back home in Cornwall, southwest England, inspired to start tackling their own energy wasting.
It says that the average individual in the UK is responsible for emitting 10 tonnes of greenhouse gas a year.
They're calculating exactly how much climate change gases their family currently produces and how it can be reduced.
Yeah, but that's the average individual. There are 5 of us here.
Ah.
Whichever way you look at it, this isn't good.
We produce about half of our food, and we try and keep our consumption of meat and dairy down. My car runs on chip fat, and we do cycle when we can. We've just got our own wind turbine, which will produce all our own electricity.
We're aiming to cut down to about 1 tonne each per year, which is apparently the sustainable amount that the world's trees and plants can reabsorb.
But the big problem is flying. Just one return flight, say London to New York, would blow our entire carbon budget for about 3.5 years. Apparently, other than setting fire to a forest, flying is the single worst thing an ordinary individual can do to cause climate change. So it's a bit of a dilemma because we've just been invited to go skiing in France.
They're now flying from Newquay, which is our nearest airport, it's like 40 minutes from here, to Bergerac, which is like, you know, an hour and a half or something from it. And literally we could leave here in the morning. We live like in Cornwall. We could leave Cornwall in the morning and be in Bergerac by sort of for lunch, after lunch. But if you actually think this is going to cause the death of people, it's actually going to affect people and make that direct connection, then it is a really scary thought. Obviously, us not flying to France or not flying wherever is hardly going to solve the problem. But it's down to what you think is the correct thing to do. because everyone else is doing it. I mean, that's not a good reason to do anything. You have to look at the terrible things in our history that everyone regrets now. Massacres, the Holocaust, etc. And a lot of that was just going along with what was the predominant thinking at the time. I'm almost jealous of the time 5-10 years ago when I could just jump on a plane with impunity. I didn't even think about it. It was just blissful. There's no moral dilemma there whatsoever.
Still today in 2019, soon to be 2020, 4 to 5 years into the scientific Armageddon, political actors use this propaganda to trick people into giving them near unlimited power and money. The willing silence of the media and the lack of true education on the young is used to mask the fact that we're supposed to be living post-end times already. They think the end is 10 years or so from now, when that has been told to every new young generation before, who have somehow lived to see the present day. It is absolutely shameful how these propagandists use the ultimately good-willing nature coupled with the complete ignorance on the matter of the public to cause mass hysteria that has been going on for decades now. They will never admit any fault in their perfect scientific theory, no matter how many times its predictions fail to materialize, because it is financially and politically immensely convenient to them. They can eternally promise to fix these issues and have fanatical supporters that will go to increasingly extreme lengths to protect their saviors. Money, support, censoring opponents, giving up to unlimited power, these are all things the alarmists wish to grant the people that tell them that they will save the world from destruction. So, this absurdity will go on, for 10, 20, 50, 100, 1,000 years until the hallucination is broken by reasonable people who simply note that, turns out the world is still here. Call out the nakedness of the climate emperor.
Investing in communities and tackling the climate crisis through a green industrial revolution.
Needless to say, they didn't take that flight. And joining a climate change protest march may not
Once again, keep in mind as these Europeans are told to protest to give more and more power to their own government over all of their life, the European emissions have not been rising for decades. None of these alleged solutions do anything according to their own scientific theory. The world would end in 2015 all the same as the non-Western nations continue skyrocketing in emissions.
We just spent the whole evening talking about wind turbines.
But he knows that they will only help solve the climate crisis as a small part of a total reordering of Western society.
There's still this idea that somehow we have to find the solution, the silver bullet. No single renewable source is going to be the solution, absolutely not.
And Piers doesn't think much of the other option, whereby everyone crosses their fingers and hopes that a miracle technology will be invented in time.
I'm not saying we shouldn't be developing other stuff, absolutely, we should be. We should be throwing everything at it. But you've got to make use of what's available now. And in the UK, we've got a great wind resource. We just got to bite the bullet and go for it.
Piers has proposed a new wind farm at Airfield Farm in Bedfordshire, central England. He could have 15 turbines installed and generating 30 megawatts of electricity within a year.
Smiling, sorry. Well, we're the leaders of the revolution, aren't we? Yeah. That's it. Outraged faces. Edward, I've lost your face again. Sorry, chap. You can just cut. That's it. Yeah, good man. Right, okay.
Well, the protest balloon is now going up, but while that's happening, I'll just explain where we are. This is the site of an old World War II bomber base. Phone, bollocks.
We all have a thumbs down as well.
UK-wide surveys point to about 70 to 80% in favour of wind farms as a concept. The difficulty is when you've got one on your own doorstep, and then it's the sort of not in my backyard syndrome.
Jim, what's the problem?
Well, the problem really is that this is one of the least windy sites in the country.
I hope it's not going to get too windy tomorrow and it wraps itself around the church.
Well, I live in Coddington and we're going to be absolutely surrounded by these high masts and they're going to obliterate the view.
What it normally always comes down to with wind farms is aesthetics. Everything else is basically put together to try and back up the ultimate thing, and the ultimate thing is they don't want it to spoil their view. According to Victoria, they They stopped a wind farm up in Scotland on their other estate in Scotland back in the mid-90s, and that was a great victory.
Piers has come back to Ernie's farm with a plan to make the turbines less visible, trying to kick-start the planning process that the anti-campaign has now held up for 18 months.
Another 18 months of climate change, another 18 months where I've been able to do nothing about it. Yeah, I feel really, really fucked off with it.
It's a fair fight.
Yeah.
And I hope you lose.
All right. Mostly based on complete bollocks, frankly. But never mind, facts are not a problem, you know.
Here's to love. Here's to you.
Come on, you stupid computer.
That is the end of the video. Thank you for watching it until the end. Share the video if you want to combat alarmism, and comment your opinion on it, and most importantly subscribe for future videos. People need to wake up and understand that just because an authoritative source says something, this does not automatically become the law of the universe. And climate predictions from the past have always been wrong.
The local people's health problems are compounded by gas flares burning night and day throughout the Niger Delta. Asthma, bronchitis, skin diseases, and cancer have all been linked. That gas is found alongside oil, but as it's dangerous to transport, it can't easily be sold to overseas markets. It could be used for cooking and heating within Nigeria, but building the infrastructure is expensive, so the oil companies just burn it off. The flares emit about 70 million tons of carbon dioxide every year, more than the annual emissions from 10 million British homes.